Welcome back to another vlog. This is She-Ra, Season 1, Episodes 10 and 11. The Beacon and the Promise. And the Promise is quite an episode. It's the one I chose for my Hugo ballot. It's just some of the best TV of the last year. There's not a lot that stacks up to it. It's just a fantastic episode of television that uses this fantastical science fictional setting to deal into really complicated, very real emotions. But it's the second episode we're talking about today, so let's rewind to The Beacon. The Beacon is an episode that happens. It pretty much just exists as a bridge from No Princess Left Behind to The Promise. It's most of the work it's doing. I mean, yes, it has the disillusion of the Princess League or whatever it's called, but that's just so they can all come riding in triumphantly at the climax of the season finale. That's pretty telegraphed. Most of the work it's doing is about forming the new villain team going into season 2. Going into the finale, really, and presumably will be continued into season 2. Catra, Scorpia, and Entrapta make a really great team because on the one hand, they are the classic 80s cartoon team of the long-suffering, exasperated leader who is powerful and strategically knows what they're doing, and the two minions that are incredibly exasperating to the leader because they just constantly getting into ridiculous antics that frustrate the leader to no end. But in the 80s, that mostly was incompetence on the part of the minions, and it made the leader look incompetent too because they're not competent enough to recognize that their minions can't do what they're asking their minions to do, which is bad leadership. They're clearly not that strategic. It's a little different here because Entrapta and Scorpia are both actually incredibly useful to Catra. It's just that their personalities grate on hers. They're both very outgoing people, and Catra is very prickly and introverted, I guess, would be the word. It's a strange word to apply to a character like that, but she's very private, she's very prickly. She's a tsundere. Another thing I want to talk about in these two episodes is Shadow Weaver. She isn't in them a ton, but her presence is felt throughout them. Because, of course, she's the one who kind of molded Catra into who she is. And there is a distinct sense in which the new villain team mirrors Shadow Weaver trying to raise Catra and Adora, finding their childish antics really annoying, but knowing that she needs them for her plans. A commenter on a previous episode, I can't remember who right now, sorry, but a commenter on a previous episode noted that right back in, episode 3 or 4, it becomes clear that Shadow Weaver knows how important Adora is from the start, and doesn't want to say what she knows to Hordak. There's something going on there. She's got some ambitions of her own that she's planning on using Adora for in much the same way that Catra is planning on using Entrapta for her own purposes. And keeping Scorpia around out of a combination of very obviously a degree of exasperated fondness, but also just because she gets on well with Entrapta, and that gives her another lever of control on Entrapta, which is more or less the purpose for which Shadow Weaver says she kept Catra around in the flashback in The Promise. So that gives us a little insight into Shadow Weaver and why she favored Adora so heavily when both Catra and Adora were like prodigies, essentially, in the things that the Horde values. And Catra in particular, her willingness to fight dirty is more in keeping with the Horde's way of doing things, you know? But Shadow Weaver always focuses on Adora because she knew something from the start. We don't know what she knew. We don't know if she specifically knew about the She-Ra thing, but she knew there was something important and special about Adora from the start, which makes sense since Shadow Weaver is heavily implied to be that past ruler of Castaspelle's realm that I can't remember, Mysticor. She's heavily implied to be that past ruler of Mysticor that went into dark magic and disappeared. If she's not actually that person, she is probably a disciple of that person. But I think it's more likely that she is that person. So, that parallel aside, let's talk Catra, because Catra's feelings are at the core of The Promise. And specifically how she feels about the promise that Adora made when they were kids to always be there for her, that they would always be together. And Adora left. She left the Horde. She left the abuse. She left the horror of that place. She escaped from being punished by Shadow Weaver and endless fighting and all of that, and left Catra behind. And that's what Catra cannot forgive her for. And Catra talks early in the episode about how she's fine with being second because it means that nobody expects anything from her. But it's extremely not true, as she admits later on. She was lying. She wanted to be the best. She wanted to be the one everybody loved, but it was Adora that was the favorite. And Adora who was always succeeding at things. And resentment for that built up. The closest thing they had to a parent was constantly pitting them against each other and telling Catra how she was worth so much less than Adora. And that affects you. I don't want to get too biographical here, but I did grow up in an abusive environment, and I was not the one targeted by the abuse. The person who was had some resentment about that fact. We worked through it eventually, but what Catra doesn't get, and what we see in Adora, is that even the kid who isn't being hit is still being abused, because they know, every time they see their sibling get hit, get told that they're worthless, all of that, every time they see that, they know that it could happen to them just as easily. They know that if they ever slip up, if they ever let the damage show, if they ever aren't the perfect one, the favorite, that they will end up right where the other one was. And, it'll be their turn. And that is a terrifying thing for a kid to have to deal with. And Adora did her best with it as long as she could, but in the end she had to run. But in doing so, she left Catra behind. And Catra can't forgive that, because in her mind it ties to all of the times that Adora didn't protect her. Adora comforted her after, but she never did anything that would, as Catra puts it, put her on Shadow Weaver's bad side, because she saw Shadow Weaver's bad side. She saw Catra get on it, and she was afraid. And it is simultaneously impossible to blame Adora for being afraid of that, and impossible to blame Catra for being resentful of it, because how could she not be? Adora talked about protecting her, but protected herself first, as anyone would, but to Catra, that feels like betrayal. And it feels like being left behind yet again. And she just cannot forgive that. She asks the question, what would I be if I had gotten rid of you sooner? If Adora had not been there to be the favorite, would Catra be the favorite? Would she have been able to rise up as she is now, to grasp power and take control the way she is now? She doesn't know. We can't know. But she thinks it's possible. And she resents that, because she feels that she wasn't protected, and she should have been. The problem is that she's directing that resentment at the wrong person, because the person who should have been protecting her was the one that was attacking her. The parent. But that happens because, she never actually blames Shadow Weaver for how they were treated. She never rejects the idea that Shadow Weaver was trying to make them strong the way that Adora does. She accepts that she has become strong in that sense. And that's because it's really frightening for a kid, even for an adult child, to say to their parent, you fucked up. To say to their parent, you did these things to me and they were wrong. Or you failed to do the things that you needed to do. That's why Adora never did it. That's why Adora ran. Because it's a frightening thing. Because your parent has an enormous amount of power over you when you're young. And that sticks with you. Especially if they abuse that power. This show goes to some powerful and important places. And I think The Promise is the strongest episode of it because of that. Because that's what the best fantasy does is it uses fantastic to talk about the most mundane thing there is, which is us, people. It uses the fantastic to tell stories about people and highlight things in symbolic terms that make them more palatable. You know? Present them in ways that we can grapple with them as exterior entities instead of stuff inside of us. Plus, you know, swords and magic are cool. So, this is really good stuff. Guess that's about it. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to vlogs, essays, let's plays, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!